and welcome back to By the Fire podcast, where I, Ken, your host, take you through mythical tales and creatures from across the Black diaspora. Today I'll be talking about His House, and I am so lucky that I'm having my friend as a guest, Temi. I've known her for so long, and together we'll be talking about the social commentary behind the film, which was directed and written by Remy Weeks. We'll be discussing the overall plot and the characters in the film, as well as the main antagonist of the film, the Apeth, which is a night witch, according to the Dinka culture of South Sudan. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I have Temi with me. She has been my friend for how long now? I'm 22, so I've known you for 11 years.
Jeez, we're
and
old.
I've known you since year 7, since we were 11. And, you know, we were together in primary and secondary school from year 7 to year 11. And then I left to another sixth form. And then you I know, and then you joined me again in our pharmacy school.
I still remember that first day I saw you. We just bumped each other in the corridor, and I was just like, "Wait, what's happening?"
I know. No, that was insane. No, that was so nice, and yeah, like just since then we've been able to like rekindle our friendship. And today we're talking about His House, and His House is a Netflix film directed by Remy Weeks, who is a British director and who also wrote the film, and it came out this year and it's exclusive to Netflix. So we're going to be talking about that today. And just a quick summary from IMDb. It is about a refugee couple who makes a harrowing escape from war-torn South Sudan, but then they struggle to adjust to their new life in an English town that has an evil lurking beneath the surface.
I think with this, you don't really get a complete idea as to what they could be facing, but you can tell it's ominous, which just makes for a perfect horror/thriller film, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're right, because even the evil lurking beneath the surface, that could be anything, you know. It's like, I guess you would assume that it was about the house because it's his house, but yeah, it is very vague. Let me ask you, Temi, how did you find the film in general?
So it's not what I expected. I did really enjoy it. Me and my friends were trying to look for something to watch over Halloween, and His House popped up on the screen, and I remember seeing it in a newspaper article announcing it would come out later this year, and I was surprised. So I did find it a really good film. It was interesting watching with my friends because I don't know, I'm always on edge about when sort of African events are or experiences are presented to people who are not from that area, if it makes sense. So I was interested to see how they take it, because there's some things that I can relate to and sort of understand and empathize with. But all in all, found it a really good film. Yeah,
I found it really good. God, you know I feel like my listeners know I am so afraid of horror, which is crazy considering
I can relate.
Considering this whole podcast is about fantasy and mythology and horror, but yeah, watching it is not normally something I do. So the reason why I found it really great was because they really managed to build up that tension without putting too many like jump scares or too many. They didn't rely on the kind of like typical horror tropes to like evoke fear. It was more about tension, and I feel like for me a great horror film is a scary one that isn't too like tacky. So the use of tension is quite common in horror, but only some people can do it like quite well, you know. So I found it really great.
I was going to say, I feel like for me, I'm the same. I won't go for horror. It was just that night it was Halloween, and the housemates were like, "Let's do something." They suggested The Conjuring. I was like, "No, miss me with that."
No way.
But I wanted something psychological, so I was like, "Okay, how about this?" It's like not as scary as what I find ghost stories to be. It sort of like makes you think, and of course, this film made us think about many different things.
It did, and like speaking of that, so the context of the film, of course, as I mentioned in a summary, was about South Sudanese refugees, and looking at the context of what's happening in South Sudan now, it's for people who don't know, it's a landlocked country in the east central of Africa. So they gained independence from Sudan in July 2011, but that celebration was short-lived because in December 2013, there was then political infighting between South Sudan's president, who then actually accused his vice president of attempting a coup against him. So that caused like fighting between the two factions of government. So that political conflict, worsened by a drought and economic woes, caused like massive displacement where over 7 million people, which is about 2/3 of the population, are in need of aid, and around 6.9 million people are experiencing hunger and are still going through that conflict, raging violence, and dire food shortages. So that is the context of where we have the two characters, Bol and Real. They are escaping that warfare, you know?
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting that, like, as a person who's far removed from a situation like this, you don't really need to at least look into this to feel and understand the emotions of Real and Bol, right? Just, literally, they just put different scenes up, such as the classic boat scene that we all associate with topical crisis that's going on down in France. We can imagine how like horrible it must be. So just having that there, which is I think was really well done by Weeks, just set the scene for us.
Do you want to tell us about who Bol and Real are?
Yeah, sure. So there are protagonists in this story. A couple we've got. They come from South Sudan, mentioned already. And from what we know, or what is mentioned in the film, Bol is was a banker, and obviously has been devastated by the crises that he and Real have faced. And here they are seeking asylum in the UK, going ahead with what's been put in place for them to assimilate into society.
And talking about their new home that is located in Tilbury, which is a town in Thurrock, which is in Essex. So Tilbury is the country's, like the UK's biggest dead-end town, but it actually didn't make it in the top 10 worst places to live. But considering that it is a dead-end town, you can sort of understand the setting that they were in. So yeah, it was very derelict. You know, their house had like rotten food. You know, the door was coming off its hinges. Even like the neighborhood was quite like unwelcoming. So for them, it must have been like, what is this house? But I did notice that Bol, he was someone who was more willing to like assimilate to the culture.
He seemed so optimistic, didn't he?
He did. Like, I remember there was a scene when they were having dinner and Real was like, I can taste the metal. You know, she did not she did not like having like to use cutlery, especially because it wasn't even probably good quality. Whereas he was just like, you know what, we'll get through it. You know, don't speak the language, only speak English. So there was very much that kind of urgency to try and forget their past and their trauma and try and live in this new place. But of course they couldn't forget that, because what did they have in their house? An opeth.
An opeth, isn't it?
Oh my goodness. So what is an opeth, Temi? What is it?
So I did some digging, tried to find out if anyone had written about this interesting creature. And as far as I could tell, an opeth is like they've carried over the translation from the language that Bol and Real speak, which is Dinka, of the Dinka people, and they're from South Sudan. And opeth literally means witch or witchcraft. And with that, you've got an idea of the gravity of the situation they're in. They're faced with a witch. At the end of the day, they're sharing a house with a witch. And naturally, the audience will be questioning themselves, why is this creature terrorizing them so?
No, literally that. I think I was reading briefly as well, and there's a whole notion about how Apeth really they basically enforce justice for people who have stolen things.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So that does bring to like up the massive twist of the movie. And I'm basically, if you haven't seen the movie by now, watch it. This is going to be a massive spoiler, so disclaimer for the next however long. Maybe we'll like put another disclaimer when it's done. But essentially, yes, like Bol did take someone else's child. to
Yep.
help them get on the
Terrible.
bus. Terrible.
Terrible.
Oh my goodness. The
In so
scene
many ways.
when the Apeth was with Rial in that scene when they were like,
Mm-hmm.
"You don't have a daughter." I was like,
Mm.
"What? What do you
Yeah, no,
mean?"
I did have to sit down and watch that scene again. I was like, okay, so what is going on here? Did this actually happen? Um, is this something that she's remembering? But like, it became more clear that the Apeth had like generated this environment of loads of different ladies, perhaps from her past,
Maybe,
and
yeah.
revealed that you didn't have a kid.
Yeah.
There's nothing there. There's a lady that goes to touch her stomach. It's like, this never happened.
Nothing's come out of you. Nothing's grown in you. Whose child
Mm-hmm.
is that? Whose child did you
It's
take?
really sad. It is really sad, to be honest,
Gosh.
when she comes to realize, because what you also come to realize is that she's been through so many traumatic events that she's just wiped it out. She's
Yeah.
forgotten. And like, as an audience, we're convinced as well that, okay, they've definitely lost their kid. But at that point of revelation, as you said, massive twist, it isn't what it seems.
Gosh, and I think, like you mentioned about her wiping it out, that's definitely something that people who go through trauma, it's
Mm-hmm.
something that the brain does. It tries to
Mm-hmm.
make you like forget that traumatic experience, and like something that could be like a little detail like that,
Mm-hmm.
that can be something that can be easily wiped from the brain. And gosh,
Mm-hmm.
I think as well with the Apeth as well, I think the worst thing about it was that not only did they steal, but there was no chance for the returning of what was stolen.
Mm-hmm.
Because the whole point is that when you steal something, there's a possibility of it being returned to the owner.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that the daughter, who was called Nyagak, the fact that she died, there was no chance for Nyagak to return back to her mother. So that was why the Apeth was even more like enraged, even more bloodthirsty for justice, because you've done something that is essentially irreversible, which is really cool. I
Mm-hmm.
quite like that about that mythology, to be honest.
I did look at it as well. Like when I was looking into Apeth, I saw that it is sort of a philosophy that is quite big with the Dinka people.
Yeah.
When they're thinking about the Apeth, right, they say that, oh, it eats people, and their idea of eat isn't necessarily cannibalism. It's something that like it takes away. When you eat something,
Yeah.
once you eat it, it's gone. There's no coming back.
Yeah.
That is what the Dinka believe is what the Apeth does, and it is something they regard as completely negative in that respect. It's exactly what Bol has done with Niagak, isn't it?
Yeah.
They stole the kid, but in the moment of which he could have saved it, brought it also to the UK, and perhaps had the chance of reuniting it with her mother, which I'll get back to in a sec, is completely shattered when he chooses to go after Rial. Understandably, pick saving Rial over saving some random kid they
Some
picked
child,
up. But they
yeah.
had a responsibility, didn't they, to look
Yeah,
after that
they
kid?
did.
And they just let her go,
Because he did
which is
use that
sad.
he did use Nyagak for their favor. Like she was just a pawn in their like being saved. And it's so interesting to think about, because it's like it's selfish. I hope we can admit and say that as a character, Bold is something that is bad. It's problematic,
Completely unforgivable. But I said I'd come back to his mom, her Niagak's mom, right?
Yeah.
If you looked at the part of the film where it is that the mum is chasing the bus, apparently the mum is shot down.
Yeah.
As she's chasing the kid.
No, she
So
is.
perhaps all thought, okay, we're going to get away with it because there's no one here to actually know that we've taken this kid. There's no one to miss her.
I like it when they like show that humanity
aren't perfect.
He and Rial has gone through such traumatic experiences, but at the same time, he has had to make so many choices that have, to some people wasn't perfect. Like you said, first of all, the taking of the child. Second of all, letting the child die. Third of all, again, even in the house, the gaslighting that he did. At first he was.
Oh, gosh. I was like, am I being affected by this?
Am
Did
I
I
being
think something wrong?
gaslighted?
I hated it.
Yeah, like he
horrible.
was like, oh no, you're just seeing things, but you're seeing them too. So, so he's lying here. So I thought showing two sides to like his character was like super awesome as well. And yeah, I'm glad. Like I feel like Weeks definitely showed that effectively as well, and also like displayed the apeth effectively as well. Although it was quite a shame that there wasn't much on the apeth online.
Yeah, I feel like it's a thing that it's just hard for perhaps Western publishers to get the things online, or even people from South Sudan to get their narrative up in a way that people who don't understand Dinka can access. It's probably that.
That's true. Like I think when it comes to language as well, some things just can't be translated into like, you know, you have like something that is understandable in the Dinka language, but then to translate it into English is lost in translation, you know.
That's probably why Remy Weeks decided to like stick with the name Apeth, because of potential loss in translation, and even to get across a much more powerful sort of unknown, right? Because the audience doesn't know what an Apeth is, so it just makes it that much scarier, right?
Exactly, and hopefully it made more people like go out and research, even though there was literally like one source about them, but it's not accessible to the public unless you can also pay for it. So
you could say it could strike up a conversation with perhaps people between people who wouldn't naturally talk about, oh, did you hear about this, or did you hear about that? If it's perceived well, I don't know if a Sudanese person would be happy, like, oh, I saw this in a film. Maybe, I think they'd be happy. It'd facilitate a sort of dialogue, isn't it? Give them opportunity.
No, it definitely will.
Back and forth.
Yeah, I had a friend who, you know, as soon as she watched it, she said, make sure you talk about the Apeth in your podcast. And I said, oh, okay. So people do want to hear more about it, you know. So I thought that was really interesting reading about it as well. You've like mentioned about the close-ups and medium shots. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about in the editing?
Yeah, so I started thinking about those because you can clearly see that for how they film it, they have the cameras close up in the person's face.
Yeah.
So that the surroundings, you can't really see the surrounding environment, and that is a device I feel is used in a lot of thriller/horror films. Like, the audience doesn't know what's going on in the background, and it just builds up that tension, right? Then there's also the medium shots, which you sort of see like part of the person's face, but you've got the background, so you can see what's going on behind the person. I don't know if that's worse.
I'm triggered. I'm already triggered just by you saying that, because I have in my head, you know, a shot of Bowl, for example, or not even Bowl, and then it's the medium shot where the peach goes down the corridor.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And I just said, no.
And the camera follows the peach, and you're like, no, I need to see where the peach came from, because something will appear.
No, like, oh gosh, I loved it so much. Like, it's the little things like that, like you said, it is typical, but at the same time, it does add to that tension.
I feel you said that the scene that came to your mind was when the peach rolls. For me, it was when Bol was looking into the crack in the wall at night, which is a terrible time to be sharing a house with a night witch, and you just see something move in the background. And with like these medium shots, they're horrible in the fact that you're not sure if you saw something, especially if they're moving like really quickly.
Oh my gosh.
Terrible. And that's a horrible thing for me, because I'll be walking around my own house like, did I see something? Am I dying today?
No, like I watched it with someone, but funnily enough, the next day I was in my own room, and the wind was blowing and the blinds were down, and it looked like there was something behind the blinds. I said, no. I said, no way. I said, like, the day later, it was still affecting me. So that's how you know this is a good film.
That's how Remy Weeks know he's been successful, by messing with our psyche.
Exactly. So something I noticed that also elevated the tension in the film was the use of sound and the music. So when the sound was used, it was also able to build so much tension, because the whole point of the film was that there was something trapped in the walls of the house. So you hear things like thudding, and you'd hear things like, you know, in the ceiling, the sound of like, the like footsteps that crashing the walls, and even the sound of Bowl smashing the hammer against the walls, telling him to get out, get out. That I think that sound sort of just like elevated that tension as well, because it was just a stark contrast to how it was normally. Like normally it'd be like quite quiet in the house.
The house, and then the film itself, there's literally no music, and it was as if it wanted to draw attention to the silence that was just everywhere in where they lived.
That silence, like you just said, it when there was noise, it was heightened because there was a lack of soundtrack, that lack of music before. So I feel like that was a good way of highlighting tension. So in terms of costume design, so I definitely found it quite dreary, like the clothes that we're wearing in like the Essex location. But what did you think about the costume design overall?
Yeah, I think I agree with you 100%. Like, it just, the people that we saw, just like quite simple. In contrast to what Bolt and Real are just used to, Africa, of course, bright colours everywhere. I've just come to this, and it's just like, okay, so this isn't how we pictured the UK. But I think they managed to use clothing quite effectively to convey various messages. For example, earlier on in the film, I haven't mentioned this, but earlier on in the film, there's a scene where Bol ends up destroying all their clothing, right?
Yeah.
Then waltzes into a department store, whose scene is actually quite interesting, waltzes into the department store and decides to go and pick up some clothes. And he turns around and he looks at this like advert or picture displaying the clothes on the wall. And he looks at this family who are white, but also relate to the general people who live here. And he's like, okay, maybe I can achieve this for myself. And in a way, it's like quite sad, because at this point you don't actually know that they've lost their daughter, and it's a happy family who've got kids and they're smiling and everything. And he looks at the clothes and he's like, okay, right, so me and Real, perhaps we can make something out of this. That was interesting in that respect. But I think there was another interesting sort of covert situation also being played. I don't know if you noticed, but as Bol walked into the department store, there was a security guard. And he noticed that Bol had walked in, right? And he follows Bol around. Now,
of course,
obviously, we know the connotations of this, but the way that Remy Weeks chose to do this, the security guard is kept out of focus. He's really blurry. You don't really see it unless you actually focus on his movements in the background. And I think that was quite smart.
I even forgot about that scene in the shop. I remember that it was kind of like an American dream family, you know, like white picket fence, all smiling, kind of same clothes. And he was looking at that like he thought he could achieve that just through fashion and through assimilation. So that was yet again another example of his desire to assimilate, you know.
It's funny because Real calls him out for that. He's like, so you think you can dress like them and everything will be fine? No,
exactly.
Sir. They won't accept you, and that's the sad truth for a lot of people.
No, it is. And even moving on with the cinematography, like there was a scene that was showing Real, you know, looking for a GP or a pharmacy, and she was going through like the endless council houses with like the endless alleyways. It's an inspiration from the scene where Jack in The Shining is going through the hedge maze trying to kill his family. So they used that sequence as well with Real looking for the GP. And I thought that was cool as well, because she was going through the endless maze. And again, there was that repeating motif of that young boy playing with the ball. So that, would you
I find it funny you said like The Shining as well, because it brought to my mind the twins in The Shining, if I've got the right film. I was like, are they twins? Are they just messing with her? But I think that was an interesting device to use to convey like how easy it is to get lost in a typical British setting, because confusing to navigate. But that's sort of a metaphor, can't you say, for asylum seekers arriving in the UK as well. So they are picked up from wherever they may have landed, if they took the boat route, then taken to a detention centre and held by authorities. And then maybe a couple of weeks or months later, carted to somewhere unknown, and just completely lost. And it's like they've been sold an idea of the UK with countryside looking beautiful as
beautiful beach, nice
even London as well.
Yeah.
Bustling cities, and then being dumped in this, sorry to residents of Tilbury, this dump of Tilbury. So yeah, just of the 3,000 UK natives that were like surveyed, 27% of them were saying like they didn't really have any sympathy for asylum seekers. 23% of them were saying they don't have much sympathy for those who are like making those horrible crossings across the waters that we see. And I think that's sadly understandable because they don't really understand what people have gone through, perhaps. They just see it as people coming in and like not dealing with, I don't know, perhaps not dealing with their problems.
Yeah, they just see it as like, people are coming to take their resources. And this was like the survey that was done like August 11th, 2020. So that was done like, after there were like supposedly a surge of like refugees traveling by
there was like hundreds of people crossing over the summer.
Over the summer, and like people died as well, which is so sad. And like, another poll by YouGov was done that found that half of the British adults felt like the UK doesn't even have a responsibility to protect migrants coming from France. 46% of Britons, that was also done by a YouGov survey, believe that the UK has done more than our fair share to accommodate refugees, which is very surprising because an EU data report shows that in 2019, the UK only received 44,800 applications, whereas...
And you compare that to like Germany or something like that, it was like what?
Germany had 165,000 applications. Yeah. It's like the comparison where the UK feels like we have so many, but then Germany has over like almost 200,000. France has 128,000. So the UK with their 44,000, they still feel like they've done more than enough. So that is the reality of where we are today, And I feel like Weeks was able to effectively show that through the film.
I feel like he put like faces to names faces to figures, sorry.
Yeah.
Because there's a really poignant scene at the end where it's just silent again, and you just see all of the individuals that were on the ship, the boat with Bol and Miao, and it was stark. Like it was really sad. You could see kids, you could see parents, old people. It was really sad. But I think that was important to put there, just to give, as I said, faces to all these statistics that the news likes to put across our screens.
Exactly, because what happens is when you see all these statistics, it kind of like desensitizes you. Like a couple hundred people died. And it's like, no, this isn't just a couple of hundred people. These are like people who are like families who had their own lives. And like you just mentioned, like Weeks was able to like portray that in order to like humanize them. So a little bit of social commentary for you, for the listeners, and like for those who are watching it. And I think that's valid. Like it's happening quite a bit recently with Black creatives with their horror, that they are including social commentary. It's been done with Get Out, it's been done with Us by Jordan Peele, it's been done with Candyman by Naya DaCosta, in the remake. So it's something that has definitely been like seeped into our creativity, social commentary. And do you think that's something that is going to be happening for a while now in terms of horror? Or like, are you like being hopeful that maybe one day we'll have horror that's just scary? Just scary for no reason,
I think it's in modern day, because all the films you've mentioned, if I'm not wrong, they're all quite recent, aren't they?
Yeah.
I feel like it's just another way of portraying the narrative as opposed to like reading it in a textbook and seeing, okay, this has happened, this is what happened in the past, or seeing it in the news, oh, okay, another number has happened, or for example, Get Out, putting a point of view that perhaps other people wouldn't have considered. I think I'd like to see a bit more where people could take this.
Okay, yeah.
Because they've done this aspect. I'd like to see what else they try and incorporate into sort of thrillers and horrors. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like, you know, I was mentioning American films. I think it's really great that British media is kind of like putting their head through the door of, like, in terms of like making good horror films. Because we do have horror films that are British as well, but like to have this Nigerian British guy, and I think it was also like produced by Film 4, Channel 4. I believe I saw them. I'll have to check that.
Good old Channel 4.
You know,
Yeah.
good old Channel 4 never lets us down.
Yeah.
So it was quite interesting seeing that from like a British perspective, which is why I wanted to make this episode, because it was very last minute, but I wanted to talk about a British horror film because I've already talked about Nollywood, and Nollywood is the movie industry in Nigeria, and it's the second highest in the world after Bollywood and before Hollywood, because they are able to bring out movies like every day, like they have no limit. And I feel like with horror in Nigeria, it's not limited to like social commentary, if that makes sense. You know, they can write about anything they want because they have that creative freedom. Whereas I think over here, what are the films that are being greenlighted that are made by Black creatives? I think it is like, can we add a social commentary in here? Which is valid, like you mentioned, but I think from my point of view, I'm looking for something different in terms of like, sometimes I just want to see a basic haunted house similar to His House, but without that commentary, without trauma. I think I want more films from us that don't incorporate real life current trauma, because the South Sudan war, famine is still ongoing, and it can be triggering for some people, you know. This was an amazing film though, so I definitely like do recommend it to anyone who, you know, likes that slow, sinister build, very similar to The Babadook as well, in terms of like using a spirit to highlight how grief and trauma can be like physically manifested as like a spirit disturbing you, such as the apeth, you know. So I definitely do recommend this film. As a final thing for you, was there anything that stood out for you in particular about the film?
There was a thing that, like, at the end of the film, I sat there, I was just like watching the credits, and I was like, okay, why is it called His House? And I thought I'd go away, look it up, and then also come up with my own like sort of conclusions. His house, it's a house that they've gone into, and it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the apeth. It terrorizes them. It doesn't allow them to live in it. As a result, it doesn't belong to them. It's his house. Then there's a phrase that's repeated a lot in the film by the sort of social workers and accommodation staff that are trying to house Bol and Rial, and they say, his house is bigger than mine, or your house is bigger than mine. Perhaps that's going with the idea that a lot of people here think that asylum seekers / refugees come in and they end up being treated extremely well, even better than those in lower socioeconomic socioeconomic backgrounds. I think that was interesting because it was repeated maybe 3 or 4 times.
It definitely was. Oh gosh, yeah, I definitely noticed that. Ooh. And it's crazy because I was watching a video that talks about like the context and the reality of asylum seekers, and they're given like what, between £35 and £50 a week to survive on.
That was ridiculous. That's what we were asking. So how do you survive on that? Sorry, go on.
How are you going to be surviving? You can't survive on that in this country. So the idea that yes, they're coming here, and this is in quotation marks, to scrounge off the society of taxpayers, well,
not necessarily true. And I feel like that was something I should probably have mentioned much earlier on. Matt Smith's character, Mark, who houses them, he does say, oh, you guys are actually lucky because normally this house would be full of 4 or 5 other people you'd normally be sharing. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah. So even that reality is like, okay, wow, it's quite sad to be cramped in a space and not really allowed to leave.
No.
And they'll be sharing with 4 other people who have gone through some sort of traumatic past.
Exactly.
And that sort of leads me on to the last sort of interpretation of the title, His House. His naturally refers to the masculine pronoun. Bol tries his best to be the man of the house. He tries to deal with the problem immediately. He pretends that they don't actually have problems in regards to their mental health. They're not being haunted by this horrible apeth that's chasing them through the house. He does his best to hide that sort of emotion. And even at the start, before we know that the daughter isn't theirs, it's as if he's trying to hide. He prevents Rial from bringing it up, that no, we didn't have a daughter, don't talk about it, it didn't happen, let's forget about it.
Yeah, it's very like male-centric. Like they tried to like incorporate like how, you know, he's technically the man of the house. And he also, like, I think you've mentioned it, but like jumping off your point, like he does like he just shouts like, you know, this is my house, you know. He's very much like, he's very like insistent to the point where he's even like trying to defy a demon or a night witch to say
trying to assert his dominance over something
over something that can kill him, and tries to kill him by shouting, this is my house. And it just shows you, even in that time of like just desperation and like complete like anguish, he still has the energy to try and assert his dominance over something that's very much overpowering him.
Out of his powers, at least.
But yeah, thank you so much, Temi. Thank you for coming.
All right.
I really appreciate. I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast. You know, like I always love to like hear.
Thank you. I was gonna say thank you for having me.
No, it's okay. Like honestly, I hope that I'm able to have you again on the podcast.
That would be brilliant. Yeah.
And I hope everyone listening as well like appreciated hearing from you as well, and as well as I did. And yeah, thank you again. So thank you for tuning into this episode. I really hope you enjoyed it just as much as I did recording. It was really fun recording with Temi because there were quite a few technical mishaps, but we got it in the end. And you know, having someone else on the episode and another perspective, another point of view, brings that je ne sais quoi to it. So I always love having guests. So if you'd like to be a guest on the episode, please email me at bythefire.mail@gmail.com. Be sure to also follow on my social media, bythefire_pod, where I post proverbs. And the recent proverb I posted is actually from the Dinka tribe, and it is, what is in a man is like what is in the rivers and the wood. What does that mean? Let me know. So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Before I finish, I want to say a huge thank you to people who've been like really engaging in the podcast recently. And yeah, I actually do appreciate every one of you, because it's nice, it's validating to know that people are enjoying the work I put into this podcast, and you know, that validation feeds me to do more and to do better, you know. So I do this for my enjoyment, but I also do it because I hope people are learning from this, and I see that, I really do. So please continue to share, please continue to rate and comment on Apple Podcasts if you haven't done so, or follow on Spotify. You can also like it and follow me on SoundCloud as well. Use the hashtag BTFpod so we can continue the conversation online, and I look forward to you joining me for the next episode. Bye!